So braking and overslowing. So braking is way too big of a topic to tackle in one shot, but overslowing is definitely something that people are prone to doing. And I think there's a bunch of different facets to that and elements, but I wanted to get your quick takes on that.
Um, well, yeah, overslowing, very common. Uh, we're talking about turn entry, right?
Right.
Trying to get the appropriate entry speed.
Yeah, that Goldilocks zone.
Yeah, right. So I think it's fear of the unknown primarily what drives that. Um, you know that like whatever you take into the corner, you're kind of stuck with. You're not going to be able to change once you get there, kind of thing. So tend to err on the side of caution. There's also when you introduce the braking, and you can probably do a better job of the numbers than I can, but where the speed comes off, it's not necessarily where you expect, and you kind of have to go through a little zone of faith, if you like, and you've got to learn how to recognize that it doesn't feel like it's going to slow down, but then it does. If you're not willing to experiment with that a little bit, then you always tend to go a little slower and basically lose too much speed too soon on the approach.
Yeah, there was a period where I really drilled in and focused on my braking. And that was really out of that frustration of coming up to a corner and going, oh, last moment, get on the brakes. And the corner's coming up. And now I find myself actually easing off the brakes while the bike's still straight up and down, and
Hmm.
then barely even trailing the brakes into the corner and going to myself, all right, well, I definitely could move my braking marker in. So let's do that next lap, and really finding it hard to do that. And there are a few different things that I did that helped me. And some of them were just the mathematical, okay, we're going to break a little later, a little later, a little later, a little later, and moving that in. And obviously choosing a corner where you did have some runoff, where there wasn't some sort of cliff
Right.
or whatever.
That'd help.
Um, the one thing that kind of blew my mind is if we take our stopping distance. So let's just say stopping distance happens to be 100 feet for a certain speed. And if we make the assumption that the G force is consistent, it's going to take you 3/4 of that stopping distance to get rid of half your speed.
Right.
And then the final quarter of the stopping distance, you'll get rid of the other half of that speed. So really, your first, let's say, half of your stopping distance, let's paint a picture. Someone's coming towards a brick wall and then they hit the brakes. For the first half of the stopping distance, they're going to say, oh, I'm definitely going to hit that brick wall,
Hmm.
there's no way. And then if they just stay in it, they'll notice that because their feet per second is dropping down, you right at the end, it really feels like all the work's getting done. But it's really just a math thing, because at the beginning of the brake application, you're traveling many more feet per second. So the first second of braking, you're going to travel a lot.
Hmm.
You're still getting rid of the same amount of speed per second, but because it's a higher amount of speed, it's a farther distance. So, in other words, although it doesn't really sound very practical, hang in there. If you're really worried and you're halfway to this thing you're trying to avoid, just hang in there, because it will get better. I'm not saying you're gonna you're gonna avoid hitting it, but it will get better. So it's just understanding that
Yeah.
really helped me a lot.
I
Um,
mean, there is a tendency in that zone to just squeeze into the brake harder when you think, oh, it's not going to stop. It feels like you should have shed more speed by now.
yeah.
And rather than, just hanging in there and then actually being able to trail off into the corner, they squeeze it and then realize that now they've slowed down too much, dump the brake, and now you're like waiting around for the corner to arrive.
Yeah, it's a bit of a comedy of errors when the person overslows, and the corner really just is a bit of a write off,
Mhm.
and it's better luck next time. But the the regularity that someone can continually overslow for the corner, and then they'll just say, "Oh, I'm going to do it this time. I'm going to go faster or whatever." It's quite scary. Another way of looking at the math or the numbers is, let's take an intersection, or rather than a corner. Let's say someone's coming into an intersection and they're going 30 miles an hour, and something happens, they need to hit the brakes. So someone pulls out in front of them, you name it. Well, they're going to have a certain stopping distance. Let's say they've got ABS, so it gives them a fairly reliable amount of G force. Let's just say it's 0.9 G stop after the reaction time. They get on the brakes and 0.9 G to a full stop. So that's going to be whatever that distance happens to be. The question is, well, how fast do they need to go for that stopping distance to double? Bearing in mind that it's the same amount of braking force. How many more mile per hour from above 30 will it take to double the stopping distance? And the answer is 42 miles an hour, which some people might say, well, going 60 would double it. Nope. That'll quadruple it.
Yeah, it's not a linear relationship between the two, right?
No. And mainly, and I guess you can look this up, or the viewers can look this up, is energy. It's quadratic. It goes up as you double it. The energy 4x's.
Right.
At least that's as I understand it. So if we take the case of someone coming out of a corner, and let's just say they happen to get a really nice run through this corner, it's a little better than usual, and their drive was even a little bit better than usual, and now they're going down the straightaway a little bit faster. So they're carrying more speed throughout the entire duration of that straightaway, and they go to that same braking marker. What's going to happen? Wow.
Yeah.
They can really blow that corner. And I bet you that's happened to people on a few occasions. And then of course we get once bit, twice shy. They're going, all right, well, let's just back this off a little bit, because at one point in the past, I completely blew the corner when I didn't think it was going to happen.
Right. I agree with that. Trying to build consistency with the points of timing and the speed. Once you're going as fast as you can go and you're pretty consistently there, braking markers work really well. But if you have a varied speed on the back straight, let's say, then it makes it a little harder to be consistent.
Yeah, plus tailwinds and headwinds.
Right. Yeah, and
make a big
slipstream effect. We see that even in MotoGP, guys pop out the slipstream. They're like, oh, hell no, I'm not making that. So,
yeah, they're trying to make themselves as big as possible.
Right.
As much wind drag as they can get.
Yep.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the other things that kind of muddies the waters, there's this belief, which I guess is true, that the later you can brake, the better. Right? But I mean, that works for the pros. That's where a lot of overtaking's done. But for your average rider, all you do is put yourself in panic mode. Right? It doesn't have to push that braking marker much later. Generally, people don't use actual markers. So it's like instinct says brake now. No, I'm going to wait for a moment. And now it's like, oh, hell, throw out the anchor and either overbrake or blow the turn or whatever. Like everything gets compressed into a shorter amount of time. You don't get to understand that transition, of where the speed actually goes off. You're just in panic mode. So running a longer lighter, I think we call it at the school, like where you would deliberately apply the brakes a little earlier than that panic braking area, but not as hard. And you still have some leeway to play with the brake, but you can run into that, the first half, go and realize it's not slowing down as much as you think, but then it does slow down more later without so much fear attached to the whole thing, and the ability to control it if you need to.
Yeah, there's a funny quote Keith asks rhetorically, and I think it was Twist of the Wrist 1, or it might be Twist of the Wrist 2, where he poses the question, do you have a braking marker or a fear-driven braking point? And in most cases, I see this myself too, come up to a corner and all right, now I'm up to pace and here comes the corner and I'm going, well, right about now. And was I exactly correlating it to a specific spot on the track? And in some cases, no, not at all. I just said to myself that's enough.
Right.
I guess to my credit, there have been times where I have had a big tailwind or a big headwind and I'm coming up to a corner and I go, well, this is normally where I shut off, but I'm not, because I don't think I'm going as fast as I normally am. So I will stay on the throttle a little longer. But that judgment is really hard to put your finger on. And there's certainly not anything you're going to be able to tell somebody that they'll go, oh, okay, now I can do it.
Right.
It's not going to happen. We did do, I think you remember at our special school we did it was just body position and braking, and the level 5 program.
Mm-hmm.
And what I wanted to do is I wanted to show the students that they're braking too early. Not by my estimation, by their own estimation.
Yeah.
We had them go down the straightaway into the corner and say, okay, get on the brakes wherever you feel comfortable getting on the brakes for that corner coming up, but just stay on the brakes until you come to a dead stop. And most of them were coming to a complete dead stop before the
Yeah.
corner even started.
Yeah.
And the riders went, huh, if I'm at a complete dead stop before the corner has even started, that's pretty compelling evidence that I can go in
Yeah.
and I can brake later. And then of course supplying cones made that a lot easier.
Yeah. Big, clear, like evenly spaced. Like you can just chip away at it. That's really helpful.
Yeah, and that's where having a school and an environment that you can completely control to do something like that. You're not going to do that at track day, of course, because you'd get tarred and feathered and banned for life. But that was, at least in my estimation, a great way to show someone
Yeah.
that they are overslowing their braking too early,
Yeah.
and they were obviously going by that fear driven braking point rather than an actual braking marker.
Yeah. And especially when it's instinct driven, like you could say to yourself, I'm gonna brake later next time, but funny enough, that instinct triggers at the same spot pretty much every time. So you need to add those markers in there and be able to actually come up with a plan that you can execute with specific detail in it.
Yeah, the other thing I realized is some braking markers are tactile, meaning you feel it.
Mm-hmm.
And this became really obvious to me when we were running Las Vegas clockwise, and then we went further down. You know how there's
Yeah,
two
yeah.
configurations. Normally you cut off early, but we cut off later. And so I'm coming down the front straightaway. There's a bit of a rise, a compression dip, and then a certain moment you wait and then you grab on the brakes and get ready for it. I had done that so many times that I was waiting for a certain feel. And then because that corner was that other configuration was further in for that corner, I was braking way too early and I was going, I had to completely just disregard what was so familiar with. But I think we're all familiar with sometimes coming into a braking zone where there'll be a few little rollers, and
Yeah.
they usually increase in frequency as you get closer to the corner, and it'll go whoa, 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 and then you get on the
Mm-hmm.
brakes. Getting someone to go further once they're very familiar with that
Yeah.
tactile feeling is hard.
Yeah, I mean, there's a rhythm to it as well. Like that's part of that. You get uh, once you get it kind of locked down, the lap time settles down. It's very close, like similar times, lap after lap. And I mean, I think Keith said in one of the books, for the top riders, they get their RPs, but then they blend into the picture, right? So you're kind of still there. You're still using the same things, but you don't. They're using less attention to execute again.
Yeah, they get it's the reference points are absolutely key, but what we really want to eventually get to is rather than getting involved in the minutia, actually go a bit macro and look at
Hmm.
that whole picture.
Yeah.
And we obviously talk about that in the wide view exercise in level 2, but I've also noticed that approaching braking zones not with that laser focus on the braking marker, but rather looking at the braking marker, but trying to be as aware as much as possible of the peripheral really makes that scene come at me slower.
Oh yeah.
So in really employing the wide view during a braking zone seems to be where it pays the most dividends actually.
I would agree. I mean, you see guys that look, say, at the turn point. So we put marks on the track, going to turn here. If they let that draw their attention down as they approach and keep looking at it until they're there, they will grab a handful of brake.
Yeah, they just
Yeah.
cinch the brake on at the
Yeah.
last moment, and,
It's
and
just
whether it's a track
perception.
day with a cone
Hmm.
or yeah.
Yeah. Total perception of the amount of space that you have to operate in. Like it's all shut down. If you can zoom back out, like you say, open up your peripheral, take in more information, then your speed is way more appropriate for the situation.
Yeah. So I think it really boils down to understanding of the math of exactly what's happening when we are braking as far as your feet per second going down, so that the last quarter of your stopping distance is where you're going to get rid of the second half of the speed that you're trying to get rid of. So there's that element. There's the wide view, and there's also the understanding of perhaps why it went really wrong in the past, where someone got into a corner only a little bit faster, but found that they had completely blown the corner and it surprised them. They didn't know why.
Right.
It all went wrong. They were spooked and there was no explanation.
Yeah, that's the worst.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. When you don't know why. So I think those are at least pieces of the puzzle. There's a lot more that you could probably talk about. Oh, and also that tactile thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Absolutely.